I guess I should get some facts up.
Facts about what?
Space.
You don't know any space facts?
I know some. I started watching Wrath of Khan again.
Space facts.
Welcome to Space Facts.
On today's episode, we'll be talking about
Space
facts. You ever watch Kill Tony before?
No, but I heard of it.
I got a little drunk the other night. I hadn't laughed that hard in a long time, but you know how YouTube will like suggest a thing? So Kill Tony came up. They'll just pull out random names from a hat. People come up on stage and they give 1 minute of their best comedy. So number one, it's fun because they'll roast each other, but also every now and then there's like an incredible, hilarious person. And then I think it seems like they have like rotating like actual pros that show up. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, the Tony Hinchcliffe, the host, he's pretty snappy.
I feel like he's pretty witty.
Yeah, he's good at. I've seen clips of it. I've never watched like a full thing, and I've heard a bunch of stuff with him interviewed in it. And he's pretty funny.
You should watch it. You'd like the show. Speaking of the show, you want to start this show?
Yeah,
let's do it.
Oh yes.
Oh, that's the wrong button. All right. Hi, everybody. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Phil.
Good to see you today.
Good to see you.
What day is it? Wednesday? Happy Wednesday. We're going to talk about some supply chain issues that we've been experiencing over the last pandemic worth of time. So probably since mid 2020, it seems like we're still feeling a lot of these issues. And I think the reason I want to bring it up is because I'm noticing my leather prices are going up. So thanks, Nick. Can you sort of simplify why I'm seeing some price increases for leather right now?
Yeah, I mean, prices have gone up for everybody, like up and down the chain, I think. And that's from, labor being a big one, but then there's raw materials and transportation costs. And then just top to bottom, it's everything. Yeah, I mean, it's not that complicated as to why prices are going up. But I think that maybe the causes of them maybe aren't that complicated either, but I guess how everything is interrelated is complicated.
I recall in 2020, your dad explaining a story to me. Skip had mentioned to me that he was receiving some letters from his suppliers for tanning materials, and they were these open-ended messages saying, hey, prices are going up, but we don't know by how much, so good luck. How is the pricing coming to you from your suppliers these days? Is it an open-ended price still?
Yeah, I think, there's still a lot of uncertainty. It's strange because certain prices are going up, inputs like oils and other raw materials that go into leather. But then the main cost driver for tanning, which is the hide, is still very low. I mean, it's definitely below where I think the market wants to be and will support it for like a long term. I think that people put these initial pricing increases through, the suppliers did. They didn't really, to me, it didn't seem like there was a lot of warning. It just came, maybe we sort of in the back of our mind were expecting it, but it came through. And then now that people have established that's sort of the way you have to do business is you have to, you're going to have to increase prices as things increase. Mm-hmm. That I think that the price increasing conversation has become a little bit more regular. So I'm not sure if it's any less alarming. It just seems to be less, it's not really news anymore. We make pretty high cost leather in the leather world, but our customers are still really price sensitive too. So we have to be careful about what and how we pass things on. And the big product mix that we have also has a big determining factor on what prices need to do.
You mentioned that the hide supplies and your suppliers seem to have been more reliable as of recent. Do you think that's because most of the hides are from North America, so we don't have to worry about too much transit?
I think that there's just more supply than there is demand right now. I think that's the main thing. I think that during the pandemic, retail went way down, or at least the expectation was that retail was going to go way down. So people that were making boots and bags and jackets and other leather goods, a lot of the orders for leather were canceled. At least that was our experience. Less demand for leather means less demand for the hides. So they were just more, but the demand for the amount of beef people were eating kind of
didn't change.
So they just were still generating the same number of hides. Supply up means prices go down.
Yeah.
because they still need to move that product because it's perishable.
I want to talk about supply chain. I think an interesting point to start with is the concept of globalization. The globalization of the economy of the world really affected us during the pandemic. It was hard to buy stuff. It was hard to get things made because we don't really make too much of the stuff we use in the United States. So I think going back and looking at the Industrial Revolution and sort of the culmination of the Industrial Revolution was globalization. You saw very efficient manufacturing all over the world, and it started to make countries realize, or nations realize, that it was valued to export their products and sort of specialize in certain products. So global exports have skyrocketed since the end of the Industrial Revolution, since 1913 up until now. And up to 1870, so before 1870, the sum of worldwide exports were less than 10% of a global output as a share of GDP. So that's a little bit wordy there. But if you look at the GDP of every nation, on average, less than 10% of their GDP was exported. And today, that share is around 25%. So that's on average, some countries more, some countries less. Certainly countries like China are making a lot more than 25% of their exports. Just thinking a little bit more about it too, because come up recently, talking to some shoemakers in the United States, it's pretty tough to get people to make stuff. And I was thinking a bit about Maine, because apparently, and I wasn't there for it, I've just been told that Maine back in the day was sort of like the shoe capital of the world. Like so much footwear was being made in Maine. And I found some stats here. So in 1980, relatively recently, there were more than 16,500 workers that were employed in the shoemaking industry in Maine. And then another 5,000 were in associated fields like leather tanning in Maine. 15% of that entire state was in the shoemaking industry in one way or another. And in 1980, there's about 1.1 million people. So to give you a sense of scale there. So it's pretty sizable amount of people. But remember when in 2020, my wife was working at the hospital and she said, we don't have masks, we don't have gowns, we have personal protective equipment. Do you remember, it's not long ago, but do you remember these supply shortages for toilet paper? Remember that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I do remember that. Yeah, I mean,
Paper towels.
hand sanitizer, and I heard some wild stories about some companies that just had the ability to even make products that would make sanitizing cleaners being sold for way more than they were worth to bigger companies, so they could just increase their output of making cleaning products. So yeah, I think that it caught everybody by surprise, especially people needing things that they didn't really need before, maybe as much. And then people, panic. I have toilet paper. I don't understand the toilet paper panic, but
I did a little reading about that. So apparently, like you at the tannery, I don't know if you're buying like the fancy toilet paper.
we're at the tannery. No.
Right. Right. So
Yeah.
I've been reading that the consumer grade toilet paper was like fancier, fluffier, like more plies and stuff. So when people were at home, they were buying more of that as opposed to like the cheap tannery owner or whatever buying the single ply nonsense stuff.
The one ply that we cut the rolls in half.
Yeah. Well, so I guess that's one of the things that had happened is the shift of consumer. But also, you were mentioning earlier that many of your customers buying leather had canceled their orders. And the pandemic also created a blockage of trade routes. So another thing, let's play the Do You Remember game. Do you remember when the Suez Canal was blocked?
I don't.
It wasn't long ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember hearing about it. I don't remember looking into it too.
So there was a ship
Deeply.
called the Ever Given that blocked the Suez Canal, which is the trade route between Europe and a lot of Asia, and basically shut down every ship because all the boats had to stop because they couldn't get through this boat. So there were things like that were happening. That wasn't pandemic related. Another thing that I had learned was there was a high demand for container shipping during the pandemic. A lot of this global trade, we couldn't make enough toilet paper, for example. So they had to order extra toilet paper and bring it in. So longer waits for shipping containers, higher shipping rates. And trucking was already at tight capacity. There weren't a lot of people that were driving trucks. And there was a lot of that work from home concept back then too, even with truck drivers. So they weren't wanting to be outside of the home. People were pretty locked down. So you didn't have any truck drivers and you didn't have any schools to train the truck drivers because they were all shut down. The combination of a short supply of drivers and elevated demand squeezed capacity and drove up rates. So that kind of leads me into something I went to undergrad business school, so not like a fancy MBA thing. There's this concept called just-in-time inventory management. Have you ever heard of just-in-time inventory management?
I mean, it's you were trying to use inputs into your manufacturing process as soon as they come in, so you're not the amount of money that you have tied up just on inventory in for your manufacturing process is kept at a minimum.
Is that what you guys are doing at Horween? A lot of
Absolutely not.
Why can't you?
Our lead times are too long to get things, and also our manufacturing times are too long, and there are too many variables for us that we found. And that, like if you look at if we were to try to do just in time for like horse hides, for example, I mean that would just result in supply interruptions for us, and we would be missing out on sales because we have to often buy things when they are available.
So the reason I bring up just in time inventory management is because I was imagining going from no demand and no orders to huge demand and huge orders. You just can't satisfy the amount of inventory that quickly. So I think it's a little hard to start and stop. Your suppliers have their suppliers too. So it's a big chain of events. Just-in-time inventory management is something that I was taught in business classes and I think is still taught. I think this philosophy has created a lot of the issues that we're seeing because companies like yourself, like nobody wants to sit on inventory, costs money and space. So I think because many MBAs were sitting around doing their like, hey, let's reduce our inventory levels, created a lot of these big dramatic swings in the supply chain. And I just wanted to mention a couple things that I think are interesting about just-in-time, sort of historical relevance. So just-in-time inventory management was started by Toyota in the 1960s, and they were doing it as a way to be more efficient. They had this thing called SMED. SMED was like a single change of dies. So how quickly can you make a changeover happen? So Toyota was really powerful in changing manufacturing, making things more efficient and more quickly. So they created these concepts after World War II when their economy was just in the toilet. It was really, really bad. More recently in the 90s, Dell was sort of the second iteration of just-in-time management. If I could be misremembering this, but it's my understanding that Dell, their manufacturing or like their assembly of their computers, in their parking lot, they had their suppliers, like literally across the street that would send them, cases and chips and all the components. So that was sort of the next step. So what Dell would do is they would get an order from me in the 90s, ordering a laptop or whatever. And then as soon as they got their order, or even before, they could actually predict when people would order and what they would order. So as their orders would come in from their final customer, they would place their supplier orders at that moment and then just have them shipped across the parking lot to Dell to manufacture them, assemble them. So why don't you do that?
Well, I've heard that example too, and I've thought about that. And that seems, it's efficient for the company like Dell that can take advantage of those relationships. But I think that, those components are still taking the same amount of time to manufacture, and those components are still coming from wherever they're coming from. And then they're just being warehoused across the street. A brilliant strategy by Dell to reduce their inventory costs. But I think that it just pushed the cost somewhere else.
It was abusive to their suppliers, really. It just shifted the cost to their warehouses, their suppliers' warehouses.
There's a cost of doing business with Dell, which is a big company that has a good relationship and you can have a good relationship with and does good business. So I mean, if you want that contractor, those orders, then that's what you need to do. So it's kind of a weird. It doesn't seem like a very pure example, but I know. I mean, from Dell's standpoint, it is. The visual that I was always given with inventory management was, if you look at your business like a like a pond or a lake with a bunch of rocks in the bottom of it. And then your inventory, the amount of inventory you have on hand is the water. That as the water level goes down, like the more rocks get exposed and the more stuff you have to navigate and the more careful you have to plan. Where if you have a bunch of inventory around, it does kind of soak up some of your management problems, especially, and your timing problems and your operations problems.
So in that analogy, the rocks are like your business problems, so your manufacturing challenges. Like more of your challenges start to appear at the bottom of the lake, like as your inventory gets lower.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it could be how reliable is your supplier in delivering it? How like your actual lead times, are those normal? Like, are those always the same?
So the inventory is a little bit more of like a safety to make sure you can supply your end customers to make everybody happy.
Yeah. And like I say, if you're looking at your inventory, if you're looking at or approach it from the notion of the internal customer too, where you're supplying yourself to during the manufacturing process. In a tannery example, if there's not enough pieces being output on a given day to then feed the next process, if there's a backlog of pieces that are then going into the next process anyway, it doesn't really matter how fast that process before is happening, right, even though that's costing time and efficiency.
So not only were the manufacturers like yourself not making stuff, but also there was incredible demand. So people were just buying the toilet paper as fast as possible. And that example continued on to many other things. Like for example, for me, I was trying to buy a couch. It's so hard to get a couch. I mean, I don't know, it's like a little first world problem there. But everything was tough to get. So I think the just-in-time thing might have been a partial contributor to some of the issues.
It definitely contributed to consumer frustration, I think, because people were used to getting stuff, ordering something and getting it right away.
Amazon.
Like the couch example, like you just expect the couch that you want to be in stock and you can get it that week. It's like, no, we actually have to make this couch for you. It's going to take a normal amount of time for you to get it.
Well, I think that was the eye-opener for the country with the masks as an example. I remember people saying like, what do you mean we can't? People could make them here, but not in the amount and the quantity that were needed. I think it was eye-opening for a lot of people that we don't make too much stuff here. And maybe we are reliant on these warehouses that are just sitting on a room full of couches to ship out. But I think the other side of it, on the demand side, we've been talking about supplies, been tough to get. And I don't think we're fully there yet. I don't think everything's normal.
I don't think so. I think that
maybe this is the new normal. Maybe they get rid of the just-in-time thing.
Maybe. I think that it's all kind of driven by price sensitivity of the consumer at the end of the day. Because if you look at whoever's buying the product, I mean, they want it cheapest and fastest. So in the couch example, like if you want the couch and you can get this couch tomorrow, or you have to wait 6 months for this other one. I mean, even if the 6-month wait one is of a higher quality, I've got to think that the majority of people are going to take what's available immediately.
Yeah, I want it and I want it now.
So there's that, and then also, so you have to compete from a delivery standpoint, but also from a pricing standpoint. Like the gowns and the masks. I mean,
those skyrocketed.
Well, it wasn't the reason that we, don't make those in certain places is because you can make an almost identical product somewhere else for less.
Globalization.
Yeah.
Well, so the other side of the equation is the demand side, and we were just talking about people with less money will buy less things, and people with a lot of money will buy more things. When you were talking about canceling orders, there was just a low supply of everything. So very few goods, and there were a lot of people that wanted those very few goods, which is why we're seeing the inflation go up. So manufacturers were unable to produce inventory during that time too, because how long were you shut down for? A month?
Yeah, we weren't really fully shut because we have perishable product. So we weren't, manufacturing, I guess we were considered essential, however they decided that.
You didn't completely
we
shut
never
down.
Completely shut down, but we also didn't lay anybody off or get, people sort of trickled out, and the people that were of retirement age retired around that time, but we didn't really shut down. But I don't 6 months for some cases, I think for
some departments or some jobs.
I think some businesses,
Oh.
some related businesses.
We started off with low inventory. We couldn't make more inventory, and then people were still getting paid. Like you said, nobody got laid off, and that was from the payroll or paycheck protection program. I always get mixed up there. So people are still getting money from Paycheck Protection Program. People are still getting money from unemployment, which is great. I mean, if you're going to ask me to shut down, please take care of me so I can pay my rent or whatever. But then you have the problem with low supply. And everybody was kind of sitting at home wanting to buy stuff, and there was no stuff around. So this was the other end of the chain of events that caused even more shortages. The current unemployment rate, people asking for unemployment insurance, is 3.7%. So I think that because there was such a low supply of stuff, we had nobody to make more stuff, and so many people at home with tons of cash just raised the price of everything. We have this inflation now. You were telling me earlier you think the prices that we're paying now might be more appropriate than the prices we were paying before the pandemic. Can you elaborate on what you were thinking there?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm smart enough to explain this in a way that makes sense to anything other than like in my squirrel brain. But I mean, interest rates were low, so there was strong demand. Debt and money were cheap, so there was a lot of buying power in that regard. People, on top of that, people had relatively a lot of money. I think, because I think the economy was strong, and despite everything, all the craziness in the world, if you were to look at that in a relationship to what things were actually costing, then I think that number gave the consumer a lot of power in terms of what they could buy or wanted to buy or what they could afford to buy.
Well, I think it's an example of more supply. It's the same thing as the supply chain, but with money. So if I give banks a 0% interest rate, they will take that money for free and loan it out to you and me and everybody else. So there's more supply of money, which lends to more economic activity and sparks the economy. So that's sort of the opposite of what's happening in this current moment. I think you were bringing light on something I found really interesting, is that maybe the labor rates that we're paying people before the pandemic were too low, and that now might be more appropriate.
I mean, maybe to tie it to what's going on now, I think that maybe a more simplistic way to think about it, or maybe the root cause of it, is that inflation itself was actually low, very low, which had the effect of keeping like wage increases lower, for example. I mean,
How would that work?
Well, if you think about like the minimum that you would, if you're a good employer, you're going to give people raises to cover their cost of living on a yearly basis. So if inflation is 2% and you're giving someone a 2% raise, that's a lot less cost for the company, and then a lot less cost to pass on than 10%. So if you're passing on to your customer, to the end customer, a 2% wage increase versus a 10% wage increase, that's a huge difference. So as inflation goes up, and labor, there's less labor, so it's sort of like a double whammy where you're charging, or you're have to pay more to attract more people that can make the things that you want to make in a good way. And then also, it just costs more for those people to live, so that you have to pay them more for that reason too.
So it's sort of like a snowballing effect. Like, I'm not a macroeconomic expert or anything.
I can think you can tell that we're both not economics experts.
But it does seem like it's a self-perpetuating, perpetual motion machine of price. I feel like the value that we as a society, let's say more narrowly focused on the United States, the value that we apply to people that make stuff is quite low as a general statement. I think we more appreciate TikTok stars and famous people, but we don't necessarily appreciate the guy on the shaving machine at the 4th floor of Horween. And maybe this supply chain issue has sort of created more appreciation for people that make stuff, and as a consequence of that, I think people will be more willing to pay for that thing that they appreciate. So we're both such small companies, and maybe this is not relevant, but I see it. I see a lot of people that are very appreciative of the work that I do, and my team does, and that you do at the tannery, and your team do at the tannery. And people want to pay for it. They get it. I think I see this small segment of people that understand and can appreciate the difference. And then they want to support people. But at the end of the day, the product needs to be really nice and different. I feel like we talk about this every decade. I guess we haven't known each other too long, or more than a couple decades. But I feel like a decade ago, we saw this same sort of concept of like moving back to American made. Like there was this big movement towards footwear, as an example, made in the USA. Shinola started up trying to make stuff specifically in Detroit. Do you feel like we went away from that and we're coming back again? Where do you feel like we're in that cycle? And sorry to interrupt myself here again, but this is something that we've noticed is like everything is very cyclical. So maybe this is another one of those cycles.
Yeah, we notice it at the tannery. At least it's kind of like it's like a 10-year cycle, and I think the last one. I think we're due because the last one was like coming out of '08 and like '09, and then that's when the Made in America thing started to pick up some steam. And I think that was because people had less money to spend, and they wanted to know what they were spending their money on. So people were doing more research. And my feeling was at that time is people were buying less stuff, but better stuff. And I'm hoping that's going to be the side effect of what's happening now again. I guess it's not the right word, but like a re-education. So people can sort of understand again that maybe it's better to have fewer, more durable products and instead of a bunch of stuff that you all of a sudden can't get anyway because of weird supply chain stuff. So I guess I'm agreeing with you is that it's on a cycle. And I think that I'm not sure that the sentiment is going to be the same, but I think the end result might be.
We also talked about Patagonia a couple episodes ago, and who knows when this is going to air or that's going to air. There was some news about Patagonia too recently, which maybe we should follow up on. He's given away, the family is giving away the whole company. And it's interesting for that alone, but also Patagonia has been preaching the philosophy you were just talking about of buy less. They would tell their customers, what are you buying this for? You don't need this. Don't buy it. It's not necessarily a good like capitalist move, but it's maybe like a good social move. But we're ahead of the game, Nick, here. Although these episodes will come out much later. We're right on it.
The Patagonia thing is interesting. I thought it was interesting that we had talked about it and then it came up again.
Right.
Like almost immediately, but yeah, they're going to donate all of their profits for climate change research, but yeah, it's interesting to give a $3 billion company away. I've taken advantage of this. They do repairs of their stuff, and the repairs they don't charge anything for repairing most stuff.
I like that.
And they also have like a worn section of their website where you can buy stuff that they've reconditioned. So it all lines up. It's
pretty smart.
Yeah.
I do that, not to talk about myself too much, but we do that at Ashland too. Everything we make is guaranteed. So if stitching breaks, leather breaks, we repair it. And the thought process for me, and I don't know if this is similar for Patagonia. I think they're different. But the thought process for us at Ashland is this is a material that is meant to be worn and meant to be worn hard and to last. And the beauty of it is how nice it gets as you use it. So me telling you to buy a wallet that's made of this nice leather, if it doesn't last, I just defeated the whole purpose. It's got to be something that you use and gets better and you hand out to the next generation or whatever. So speaking of the news, let's get to the old news now. James Webb Space Telescope. All right, Nick, if you could go back in time to any time, where would you go?
Roughly 10 billion years ago.
Actually, one of my favorite, and it is my favorite movie, Back to the Future, was based on that. I don't know if you knew that, but the guys that wrote it, it's like Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis wrote Back to the Future because they thought it'd be interesting to see what their parents were like when they were in high school. Back to the Future. It's awesome.
Is that your favorite movie or one?
I love Back to the Future 1 and 2. 3, I think you leave it. It's just whatever. I kind of hope maybe I regret saying this if they ever do it and it sucks, but I kind of hope they make another Back to the Future. Because the predictions they had in there were pretty good too, like the Cubs winning the World Series. Just food for thought there.
They did. I did see that there's a new DeLorean out there.
For real?
I think so. I'm not sure if it's just a concept, but
maybe we'll have to switch the news segment to
DeLorean.
Anyways, the reason I brought up the time thing is James Webb Space Telescope can see back in time. In fact, every bit of light we see in the sky is from the past. From how many billions of years ago did you say? You had mentioned to me that you were really into Hubble. And probably because we were of an influenceable age at that time. But what intrigued you about Hubble?
The images are so mind blowing to me. I think I really like space and all this associated sort of nerdery.
You nerd.
But I can't think of it for very long because it starts to get too complicated. And I had a desktop background from Hubble on my computer for a while. And I had to take it off
Why?
because every time I saw it, it would just make me think too deeply because I knew how, and I was looking at the image and I knew how like many of our solar systems across that one image was. Or even, I mean, maybe it was galaxies. I guess I don't remember. But it was the image was like, this is 120 of our galaxies across, and just like it's on my screen. It's like I don't
freaked you out.
I don't look at that anymore. But that was a Hubble image, and
when was this? When you were recently?
Yeah, a couple of years ago. I put it on there initially because I was like super stressed out about a bunch of stuff, and I put it on there thinking that it would give me some perspective.
Calming space image.
No, it was like, oh, this is like, look how big this is and look how relatively simple I can distill my problems or my stresses to. So I was trying to give myself perspective, and it was like weirding me out in another way. But
so now that you have these higher resolution images of the galaxy, like, does that make you more give you comfort or give you more stress?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't thought about it the same way since then, but the Hubble was interesting just because the images were they looked fake. They mean the like the images of the nebulae.
Well, they might be fake depending on if you're into the flat Earth.
Yeah, well,
it could be all crap. Although the new James Webb images, and I think even the Hubble one, they do edit the color because they're reading infrared light, which we can't see. So they have to sort of manipulate the image to some extent. And then, of course, they make it really beautiful. So the images that we see have been manipulated, but I believe that they're real images of light that we can't necessarily see.
And I think it'll be interesting. I mean, the Hubble was interesting because do you remember how many problems it had? Like when they first put it up, how it like wouldn't focus and they had to make like glasses for it.
Yeah.
Like, put glasses onto the...
And it was like a literal like millimeter of difference for the lens. Didn't they send the space shuttle to go fix it?
Yeah, it was like a big, huge repair. I think it was the mirror actually that was the issue, but
yeah, and it's like billions of dollars. Although James Webb's billions of dollars too. But the big difference, there's two big differences that I can tell. And we're not astronomers, are we?
we're not.
No,
We're not.
But as far as I can tell, the big difference is the sensitivity of James Webb is much more strong than the Hubble. And the reason that it's more sensitive to light is because there's more mirrors to collect the light on James Webb. And it's just larger. The other interesting thing about Webb is that it's reading that different range of light frequency. So not just the visible light that we can see, which is what I understand Hubble was reading, was just visible light, but Webb can see infrared. And the reason that they chose to make it sensitive to infrared light was because of this thing called redshifting. So as the universe expands, the light that is being sent out from a star at the edge of the universe is coming our direction, but the star is going away from us. Because of that, the wavelength of light that was once visible gets stretched. And when the wavelength gets longer, it becomes more red. So infrared. That's why they made the James Webb see infrared light, so they could see that edge of the galaxy more easily. I thought that was super fascinating. And like you said, it's kind of mind melting. Why? Who cares? I guess is the question.
They're trying to make more cool pictures for me to put on my computer.
I mean, they're pretty good. And you sent me the, what was it's like
the newest one, the tarantula nebula photo. And that's definitely artsy. I'm sure that there's been some rendering done on that, but there's also some interesting images of that in composite with the Hubble images, so you can see the difference. And then also there's slightly different light that's seen. So I think that they've made some where again, it's a composite image. So you get like a pretty complete picture of what it looks like, but it's pretty wild.
Yeah. Well, I was asking you rhetorically, but I think have they succeeded in getting you to put new images on your desktop?
Not yet.
They just have to make a better picture. Well, so as far as I can tell, there's a bunch of research they're going to do. So we don't necessarily know exactly what they're going to find out, which is why they're researching. But they're trying to figure out the origins of the universe, and they're trying to find life on exoplanets. And as far as I know, that's it right now for James Webb.
I feel like I should look. I should have looked before we start talking about like when the first images came out. It's not like it's this year. I mean, it's not like it's been or July maybe. It hasn't been that long. So
it's going to take a while.
I'm following it.
I mean, it took them. They wanted to first launch this telescope 12 years ago. They wanted to launch it in 2010. So it's taken them. They are actually talking about this telescope before Hubble was up.
I didn't. So
I mean, it's taken them decades just to get the thing up there. So let's give them. I guess we'll give them a little time to figure out what they're going to do with it. All right, Nick. Let's get into favorites here. Do you have a favorite picked out? I know this stresses you out. Does this stress you out? Should we bail on favorites?
No, it's good. I have a lot of favorite things.
Okay.
We were talking about the space telescope. I'll talk about a camera.
Oh yeah. Well, thinking about sensitivity of the telescope. I think it's kind of the concept with ISO, like the film sensitivity. It's the same thing on the telescope. Speaking of that, I forgot to mention what I also find incredible is the because it's reading the infrared light. It's very sensitive to heat. So infrared light is heat. So it has to be sent out. The telescope is, I believe it's 4 times the distance of the moon from the Earth. And it's also orbiting the sun. So the telescope's orbiting the sun at the same rate as the Earth orbits the sun. It's just farther apart. But the reason they had to send it so far and create some additional shielding on the back of it is because even just the heat of the moon and the heat from the Earth are enough to interfere with the infrared readings that the telescope's getting. So that sensitivity is remarkable. Anyways, what camera are you into? Sorry.
Yeah, so
You're a big camera guy.
I do like cameras. I wish I was better at using them. I think I'm okay, but there's always room to improve. But there's a camera from a company called Mamiya. It's a film.
Can you spell that?
Mamiya. And they made a bunch of different stuff, but they made it's a medium format film camera. So it's a 6x7 centimeter negative. So it's a bigger, if you think about 35 millimeter, it's, look it up. It's bigger.
Look it up.
So you get a lot more detail.
Look it up, folks.
You get a lot more detail because you're just taking in more info, more light. But they made a Mamiya 7, and they made 2 versions of it. But I have the first version. But it's a rangefinder, so it's a relatively small camera because it's not an SLR, so it doesn't have a big mirror in it. But it's a really good balance of image quality and portability, relative portability for that kind of big negative. But I was going back through, the reason I picked it is because I was going back through some images for some customers that asked for some process images, and I was seeing a bunch of photos that I'd taken with that, and I like the way they look.
And you have the old version of it, you said?
Yeah, there were 2 versions of it. I think they came out, 5 or 6 years apart. There's a 7 and then a 7.2. And the 2, they just made some improvements in terms of like coatings and.
Are people still making medium format analog cameras or film cameras?
I'm not aware of anybody.
Okay,
I think that
it's gone, huh?
I think that there was some medium format Polaroid stuff that was made, but I think that might be it. They still make the film, but even that is not as available as it used to be, and more expensive. But I'm not aware. I'm sure someone could.
It's kind of the film stuff has a vibe. I know that you appreciate. I kind of like it digital. Maybe you could describe what you feel when you see a film image, photo versus digital. What does it do for you?
For me, it slows me way down. So
the process of shooting.
Yeah, well, and because you've got So if you've got a medium format camera and you're getting 10 or 12 or that many exposures on a roll, and the roll is $10, and then to get it developed is $25. So you look at like the cost per image that you've got. So just from that standpoint, that makes me a lot more considerate. So I feel like I end up with much fewer, content or images, but they're more thoughtful. And think about, like, I would go on vacation with the digital camera and come back with like 1,000 pictures, and now I come back with like 60.
Yeah,
and they're all something that I would maybe consider
putting up on the wall or something,
printing or showing somebody.
Yeah,
where like you'd be sifting through all those digital images, and I think that digital is still. There's a reason that it's taken over, but I do think that they look different too. The images, beyond the graininess, but I think that
there's like a vibe to it, right?
There's something about like the physical act of you're like altering the chemistry of a piece of film, and then when you're taking the light, you're translating that altered piece into an image. Then, especially if you're printing from a negative, which I don't do, but I think you get like a much more like 3-dimensional feeling image, and that could just be placebo, but that's the feeling for me.
That's cool. I actually didn't think that was what you were going to say. I didn't realize it was about the process. But that makes a lot of sense. Like, what if my digital camera just like pinched me every time I took a photo? Like, I guess I'd take less of them. All right, I'll get to my favorite.
What's your favorite film?
It's also another thing about consideration and like thinking about stuff. You and I like similar music. Most people do not like death metal.
Why?
I think it's the everything about it. I like an even more extreme version of death metal called tech death, technical death metal. And one of my favorite bands released a new album. They're called Fallujah. And I think you may have listened to Fallujah.
I have.
The bass player on this new album is so good that if he was playing any other genre, he'd be like the most famous bass player in the world. The guy is doing stuff, and I feel like I'm a pretty competent bass player. So most times I hear something, I'm not impressed. I'm impressed, but I can play most everything. The guy on this album is playing stuff that I can't even imagine thinking of, let alone playing. So he's incredibly creative. And then, I'm just talking about the bass. And it made me think a little bit about how listening to music for me is probably different than most of the world. Because I will listen to the same song, same album multiple times from different perspectives. So I can listen to an album and think about the collective, like all the stuff, how it fits together. That's, I think, how most people listen. Or I think most people will listen to just a singer. Like, that's it. They'll just hear the voice. I like to listen to it focusing on different instruments. So in this example, in the Fallujah album, listening to it as like the bass is the focus, which is definitely not mixed that way. But if you tune your brain to like on those frequencies of the bass, the perspective of this album is really, really good. I like it a lot. I don't know if it's my favorite Fallujah album. I've listened to it a few times now. I like it, but if you're into technical death metal, check out the new Fallujah album.
I'll have to listen to it. I've only heard snippets.
Yeah, it's good.
On your
honestly, White Ward
suggestion
that we talked about in episode 1, still probably the best album this year. It's so good. God, I would really like to see them play, especially because of the saxophone guys. Like, it's so different and unique.
I'll have to get some more music recommendations from you because I need some stuff.
Hey, I got you. Well, thanks again, Nick. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Phil.
It's fun to do together. We get to hang out.
Very fun.
And everybody listening, thank you guys so much for checking it out. If you want to leave us a review, really appreciate that. You can send us some questions too to fullgrainpodcast@gmail.com. And we're also going to start releasing some clips on our YouTube channel. So thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.